Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Embodied. In this season of the podcast, I explore the topic of trust and its transformational power. And in today's episode, I have the joy of welcoming a good friend of mine, leadership coach Nick Matheson, to talk about trust through betrayal, perhaps, how we can invite and allow our emergent self, which when I say that word, I mean that it's the more that you came here to realize and to manifest in this lifetime. I wanted to also talk about how we can take up more space in our lives and how we can lead ourselves into living a life that we absolutely love. And we'll also touch a bit on how important it is to trust life with a capital L and how we can do that. So Nick is a business strategist and a leadership coach who helps his clients create a life that they love. As a devoted student of nature, he supports entrepreneurs in aligning who they truly are with their aspirations for positive impact in the world. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you, Anne. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
It's so good to be in conversation with you today. For those who don't know you, I want to just mention that Nick is the friend I refer to in my book, The Burnout Antidote, the very good friend who asked the very deep question over coffee. He asked the question, what are you most afraid of these days? And it really threw me into an amazing exploration of my anger and my rage and my fire at the time. And so I wanted everybody to know this is the friend with whom I have really deep conversations, and hence why I invited him on the podcast today. Yeah, and we met about 10 years ago, and I just want to say that we became friends really quickly, but you also coached me through some important I would say abundance blocks that I had at the time. And you have a really incredible capacity to see the more that someone can be when you engage in conversation with them. And yeah, I just think you're brilliant. So I'm really, really happy that you're here today.
Thanks, Anne. I'm happy to be here as well. Someone asked me, we ran into each other a week or so ago, and someone asked me how we first met. And I couldn't actually remember. I just said it feels like we've known each other forever. So it was one of those very serendipitous meetings when we did connect many years ago, and it's been a wonderful friendship ever since.
I remember how we met.
Yeah?
You
Do you want
you
to tell
emailed,
that story?
yeah, it was, you emailed me. It was simple. You emailed me, and I think you'd heard about me through a mutual friend, and we went for coffee at Lion Bright. That was our first
Wow.
meeting. Yeah.
And
And we were friends from there. But
did I
we
ask deep questions that day too?
probably definitely. That's when I knew we were going to be good friends.
Mm, mm,
Instead of having to go through the small talk. Um, I really wanted you to come on the podcast, Nick, to talk about trust because I think, well, I know for you, it's a powerful word, correct? In the work
very.
that you do, and yeah, and then I'd love for you to share with our listeners, like, kind of what has brought you to doing the work that you do with people, because it's you're not a typical leadership coach. I just want to make sure everybody knows this. Like,
Mm.
there's definitely a bit of shamanism going on in the way that you approach it. So yeah, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit how you got to this work.
that there seems to be something that's always a little atypical, and that I'm not a typical anything in anything that I've ever done, I think. And probably that's part of what has led me to the work that I am in that it is a trust. It's a trust in the unfolding of my own experience and being willing to follow that at times when there have been many times when that feels very unclear, it feels very frustrating, it feels very exciting, and through all of that, there's sort of been a consistent thread of, I don't know, it sounds very cliche, but sort of self-realization or just being able to kind of trust that path.
Mm.
And specifically, I would say my career really began in healthcare and very focused on pain management. And at a young age in my teenage years, actually, I experienced a lot of chronic pain myself. I grew up in a family where my mother had experienced many years of illness and chronic pain, and that probably informed that early phase of my career path in wanting to kind of figure that out for myself and find some sense of kind of liberation and ability to help other people who were struggling with those different things. And so that took the form of being a physiotherapist and expanding that into a sort of specialization on pain management and healthy aging and wellness and many different aspects of that, but always looking for ways to experience greater freedom myself. And as I learned how to liberate aspects of myself, how could I share that with others? And I think that has been a deepening from a physical state to more of a emotional state to a spiritual state. There's always been a leading edge of um, exploring more freedom and
Mm.
expression of kind of who I am and a desire to share that in some way with other people.
Mm. So would you say that desire for more freedom is a big driver in your life to take you to where you've been and where you're going?
The phrase that resonates most with me that I often use is where I love to be is at the edge of the familiar. And so there's a comfort in I'm connected to what's familiar to me and what I feel like I know, and I always want to be exploring the edges of that and finding ways to continue to expand. And in particular, just kind of connecting those dots as well. Business became something that was a real passion because it had a lot of creativity. It had sort of an unlimited learning curve. It had lots of applications that kept me interested beyond the kind of, as I said, I wasn't really a typical physiotherapist. I was always looking for ways that I could do things differently. And early in my sort of entrepreneurial career, my oldest daughter got very sick, and that took me away from my business for a period of time. And it was again a very painful experience in the context of business and being separated from something that I had poured a lot of effort into and couldn't really realize what I was trying to accomplish there.
Because you
And
had to spend a lot of time with her and
yeah,
business
I
on the side for a
was.
bit.
Yeah, my business at the time was essentially me, and I was away from it for 6 months to kind of deal with her issues. And then when we moved back, we were living in a small town about 2 hours from where we are now. So when we moved back into the city, I left that business and then kind of had to rebuild again. And that experience has been very informative to me in many ways around how I see um, value creation, at least in the context of business, but also, you know, it was very informative of the choices that I wanted to make in my life to be more aligned with who I felt I needed to be or wanted to be in the world.
Hmm. And if you look back on that transition and that period of time with your daughter, like, what was your relationship to trust at the time? Like, did you already have a good foundation?
In some ways, I would say, yeah, the foundational pieces were probably there, but in many ways, there was a lot of seeking, a lot of anxiety. Like, I had things pretty well established with my house and family and clinic and all that kind of stuff, but I was always looking for something else. There was always some sense of something was missing. I needed to learn more, be more, whatever. So there was something in me that was very unsettled. Still probably is in some ways, but that experience was sort of facing one of my biggest fears. Like here was this little daughter of mine who I loved very much that suddenly was facing an illness that there wasn't a lot that I could do about it. And in that, I remember when we were told her diagnosis, we kind of received the news that her prognosis was not very good. She had about 10% chance of survival. And it was
Wow.
a pivotal moment for me in that what I did was turned to the doctor and I said, "Where's the silver lining here?" And he said, "We're going to treat her. We're going to go ahead. There's enough kind of hope here that we'll proceed." And the outcome has been great 20 years later.
Mm.
Um, but that moment remains a very tangible experience for me of trust that things would be okay, I guess, that we would do our best to support her, give her whatever um, she needed to kind of be happy and have fun through that period of time. But it really was a turning point for me. I'll never forget that moment of not just giving into the despair and upset that I also felt, but kind of turning toward, there's something deeper here that we can hold on to.
Wow. What would you say that deeper thing is? Name it.
Uh, yeah, that's a little harder to put into language, probably. Um, it's it's a trust in life. It's just to allow to not argue with how things are. When you're faced with something that's really difficult, when I've been faced with something that's really difficult, there's a resistance that comes up and something about that I obviously don't like, don't want to embrace. And the the deeper opportunity is to let go and just say it is what it is. It's okay and it's going to be all right. And in any moment, in any context that I've ever faced those kinds of experiences, I've always found that place and it's always been okay.
Hmm. Wow. That's a good foundation to have. That's
Well,
a
I need to
great
be
gift.
reminded of it frequently. And that's, I think, what life does. It brings us the opportunities um, to learn. Like
Hmm.
whatever it is that we need to learn, life will present us with that opportunity.
And so after that, your business changed and you became a coach more than you stopped doing physiotherapy.
Yeah,
And
I continued to do it for a while and opened a much larger clinic with a much larger team and a lot more expenses and a lot of difficulty of kind of figuring out the business at that side at that time. And at a time that was pretty difficult. And but getting through that kind of became the experience that inspired my desire to coach in the context of business and for business to be a vehicle that was about making more meaning in the world and having more impact. And, there was a lot about business as usual, right? I didn't want to be a typical business person or coach even. It was, how can I inspire and support people in doing things that I feel are important and affecting change.
mm,
And I think that ultimately comes down to helping people reconnect with who they are and what's most important to them, and from that, what do they want to do? And many of us, and including myself at many times, are in that sort of tension of of feeling like there's something more that we want to express, something more that we want to do. And often obstacles or barriers or self-limiting beliefs or different things that get in our way of being able to take action around that. So that's kind of what
Mhm.
I love to help people with.
Do you do you remember if there was a person that you met or an event, a moment where you got really inspired with a way of coaching? Because that whole focus on, the person, they're becoming, and the possibilities and the potential is not typical. Like, is there a person or a moment that you remember where you were like, this is the kind of coaching I want to do?
Hmm. I'm going to tell that in a more expanded kind of way, in that, um, again, in how my career developed. When I was in physiotherapy school, from day one, I was kind of like, I don't really belong here. This is not my place. And when I went to do my MBA, I walked into that classroom and very quickly felt like, oh, these people think like I think. And that was nice. It was kind of nice to connect with other business owners and people that were thinking about some of the things that I was. And I didn't have that experience with the people that were working with me in my business and so on. And then I sort of somewhat accidentally, it seemed, but stumbled into a coaching conference when I was doing some consulting work right after my MBA. And I walked into that room and felt, oh, these people feel what I feel. And it
Mm.
was very much about coaching in a way that kind of brought together the more intuitive aspects of who we are, and how we kind of bring that into business, how we build more emotionally intelligent environments and stronger cultures, and really make business not just about commercial success, but also about fulfilling purpose. And that really felt like where I wanted to go. That was the business context side of things. And then probably a year or two later, I went on a very profound retreat where I met my primary teacher, Dale Goldstein, who has developed a process called Heartwork. And it was a 5-day retreat at Rochester Zen Center in upstate New York. And it was just a profoundly healing experience, deeply um, transformative. And it wasn't coaching per se, but it certainly informed my understanding of who I am, who others are, uh, and again, what is needed for us to be open to the experience of life and overcome some of the barriers or limitations that we sometimes put on our experience. So that was probably it's certainly the thing that sits with me every day, and informs most of my own practice, and probably
Mm.
flows through much of my work.
What did you learn about your heart or the
Mm.
heart during that program or that encounter?
Again, I'm going to tell a longer story here, but I arrived that night and we started with a walking meditation, and we were walking around this meditation hall, and I felt myself being competitive about people would pass me, and I was like, oh, I'd get so irritated that I wasn't walking fast enough or something like that. It was a really bizarre experience. And then we kind of moved into second phase of the practice that he was introducing us to, and there were many people who had been longtime practitioners of this approach, and it felt like people were emoting very strongly, and I was just like, this is crazy. Like, what is going on here? This just feels like a lot of manufactured, over the top sentiment, and I was really repulsed by the experience, honestly, and just felt again like, what am I doing here? How do I get out of here? Was the initial
Can
reaction.
relate to that experience.
Yeah, and instead of running away, I just was like, well, I'm here. I'm just gonna dive in, and and I remember going and lying down right in the middle of the room beside this person who was kind of the emoting more strongly than anybody else. And I just felt this wave of energy kind of overcome me, and I just sort of dropped into this deeply emotional space of expressing things within me that I didn't even really know were there.
Mm.
And over the 5 day period, it was that would kind of come in waves and be kind of connected to the different practices that we were doing. But I'd kind of have this sort of cathartic experience, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to help others now in the next session that we go. Like I'm done. And instead, it just would go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Uh, and so I guess what I recognized in that experience about the heart is that it has infinite depth. It has incredible ability to open, and it seemingly holds on to a lot of things.
Yeah.
In that there were experiences and emotions expressed that were not part of my conscious awareness, were not something that I was thinking about on any regular kind of basis, and by moving some of that energy, expressing that, uh, and there was just a deep authenticity that emerged from that whole experience. And I guess I learned that my judgment was wrong at the beginning. That yeah, being present to and willing to express whatever it is that we're experiencing is important and helpful work.
Mm. See, in your presence, I feel the permission to express whatever is in my heart in that moment. That's something that you've definitely embodied from your
Mm,
experiences, is that you give me permission to be honest with what's happening in my heart, regardless of what the experience is, regardless of if it's dark or heavy or sad or angry, or um, absolutely passionate and grand and exciting, and also completely confusing because my
huh,
experience of the heart, and you described it so well, like it has infinite depths and it holds a lot. And I also find that for me, it is the place where I can be at the edge of the familiar, like you said.
mm.
And so it's often where I find myself not knowing, and it's okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. I take that as a really high compliment, especially coming from you, and I do hope that's the space that I hold for people. And I described that heartwork retreat in particular as total permission, total acceptance, total love. And I just felt immersed in that experience for 5 days. And again, he became my primary teacher, and I still connect with him regularly. That was probably a decade ago. Would have been around the time we actually met. And yeah, to me, it was a wonderful gift, and if that's a gift that I can share with other people, then I want to do more of that.
Mm. So, recently you've had an experience of life throwing you into confusion and loss, and another invitation, I guess, to deepen yourself. And I'm curious if this experience has felt like a betrayal for you. Maybe it hasn't, you know. Um, I'd love for you to share like what's happened recently.
Yeah, so this time last year, I was diagnosed with cancer, a type of cancer called sarcoma. It's a connective tissue tumor that began growing in my leg. I actually noticed it the morning of my 50th birthday. Largely ignored it for many months, as some of us are prone to do when we're facing health challenges that we don't want to acknowledge. And then, finally got the help that I needed and started treatment almost a year ago. It it certainly felt like an invitation to go deeper into whatever it is that I needed to learn, to let go. There was an element of sort of betrayal in that it felt like, oh, I've done all these things to be healthy, to be well. Like I've spent 25 years of my professional life focused on wellness and some would say kind of obsessed about healing for far too long, and so it felt like um, a disappointment in that regard that my actions had not led to the outcomes that I wanted.
I think that's so big because I think a lot of people find themselves in situations similar, and blaming ourselves is the first thing, that we do. We're so good at that. We're so good at judging.
There's
It
that
must be, it must be me, you
there's that
know?
saying that circulates on Facebook and whatnot every now and then about those that won't make time for wellness will have to make time for illness. And I just like cringe and get so angry when I see something like that because it's like I made so much time for wellness and here I am having to deal with that. That shifted pretty quickly, but if I go back, uh, to the year prior to this, there was actually an experience of betrayal in a couple of different ways. In that I had committed to work that I thought was going to kind of carry me through the next 5 to 10 years, checked all the boxes, something that I was really excited about doing, and then that kind of came to an abrupt end unexpectedly. Uh, a friendship that I had um, really learned to count on abrupt it or end it very abruptly as well. Another friendship, somebody just sort of stopped talking to me, and that's the kind of thing that can really drive me crazy is if I don't have an explanation for, what's going on or the ability to kind of talk things out. Um, those all felt like big betrayals of kind of life not working out the way that I expected it to be, or people not being kind of what I expected them to be. I think as I have looked deeper into that, probably the bigger betrayal was kind of some disconnection from myself and my own authenticity in choosing that, or those kinds of things. But there were painful experiences in that kind of what Brene Brown calls the midlife unraveling of this isn't going the way that I thought that it was going to go. Um, and I'm not saying it's causation, but cancer was probably part of that, and it was certainly an invitation to sit with the experiences of that emotionally and physically, um, and just process a lot of that kind of experience and again kind of reconnect with something deeper, find that ability to trust the unfolding of life and so on. And that sounds like I did that gracefully or easily. I didn't always. In fact, during my recovery, the hardest part was when I had my first surgery. It went really well, and I thought that I, would be able to, motor through the recovery part really quickly and easily, and that I was expert in that. And then it all went not according to plan or my schedule or any of that. Lots of complications and another surgery and all that stuff. And so what I thought I could control that I ended up not being able to control became really frustrating. And again, just a deeper lesson of all I can do here is let go and be present to what is and work through this.
Mm. Wow. I think when you were at the peak of your um, experience with cancer, we were having conversations about surrender and letting go, and letting go, like letting go of beautiful things too, right? Like that this identity that I have, mm, constructed for the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years, which I've worked really hard at holding, is beautiful. And I've worked hard at creating, right? And creating myself from that emergent space, and becoming who I'm meant to be. And then realizing that even these beautiful aspects of myself, I'm being asked to surrender. I'm being asked to bring it back to the garden and just say, I leave it to you, whatever you is. Like, I leave it to the great you, or, the life, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. But that energy that, that grows my fingernails and grows your fingernails, like, it's a surrender.
You had said something about the alchemy of trust, and one of the things that really caught my attention was allowing things to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear more of your perspective on that. And it resonated with me because I recognized in that the struggle that I've often had in allowing things to end. And as I've kind of explored some of those things that have been lessons, that has always come down to a attachment to some aspect of identity, or identifying with things being a certain way or needing to be a certain way in order for me to be okay. And then being willing and eventually able to surrender that identity.
Mm-hmm. I Just a couple years ago, I realized I that who I become was no longer useful or big enough for the pressure that of life that wanted to push through. Like, I could, through myself, through my body, through my mind, I could see things stopping. Like, the flow wasn't there anymore with certain things that was so proud that I built. And coming to the realization that in order for me to be able to see what's coming, I'm gonna have to let this die. And someone had shared with me that metaphor of the rose in the garden, and how beautiful the rose is, and spent all those years becoming the coach, becoming the author, becoming this specific type of teacher, and with different resources and things in place to support her business, and looking at the rose and, like, just thinking she's so amazing. Like, she's hot shit. Like, this is amazing. Like, and congratulations to me for, having manifested what was a dream 10, 15 years ago, yet feeling those petals starting to fall and trying to grab them back, and glue them back on the rose. No, this is who I am. Stop dying. Like, this is important to me. This is so meaningful to me, and trying to bring the petals back. And then eventually just letting the dying process happen, and realizing that all along I was not the rose, I was always the garden. And that in that recognition that I could create anything I wanted, and that everything has a time, a time span, the lifespan. And I'm the creator, not the thing that was created.
Beautiful.
That's my relationship with this idea. And I feel like now there's more of that, like what you talked about earlier, like being at the edge of the familiar, because that space of the garden is an impersonal space. If I try to identify myself in that space, I lose track of really who I really am. Like, I cannot put boundaries or boxes around that experience, it has to stay pure. It has to stay latent with possibilities. It has to be a space where I can really fall in any um, without any labels um, or identity with it. I call it like that impersonal core essence space. Maybe you have a different word for it, but I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was on a really great hike this weekend where I went back to um, a forest that I had often visited, and having gone through what I did last year, I'd been away from a lot of the activity and walking and that I've done. So this fall I've been doing more of that. It was great to be back in that forest, and it was very much an experience of the edge of the familiar. It was familiar to me. I'd been there many times walking this particular path, but always new. And I have another mentor who has kind of framed his teaching as nothing missing leadership, and that garden perspective of wholeness and true nature and big picture, and that's the view, that's the experience that at many moments I've had, and and yet I often also have a feeling of something missing. I talked about that being a big driver for me years ago. I still
Mhm.
have that feeling. So
Mm,
there's this tension sometimes between the view of nothing missing and the experiences that I've had of that sort of wholeness and perspective and being the garden, and this feeling of something missing
mm,
and the remembering that's required to be able to kind of hold that larger view that I know is true, that I know is who I really am, even when I kind of fall back into a feeling experience of um, small personal woe is me kind of self that needs something outside of me to complete me, which is the seeking that has driven a lot of my experience through life.
yeah.
And
Like the
so when
feeling of
I
I'm not whole.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so that I don't know that this is always true, but increasingly that feeling, that experience is a pointer, a reminder back to the experience of wholeness, nothing missing, the garden, surrender,
Mm,
trust, all of these kinds of things. And being in immersed in a forest is the best way for me to be reminded of that, or the easiest way where that's really accessible to me to have
yeah.
that experience of the whole.
Yeah. I think that's it's really familiar for, you know, I'm sure listeners can relate to that feeling of like, perhaps they do meditate and they have like a practice and they feel they're on the healing path, they're on a expansion path, and yet there's these weeks or months that can go by where there's this feeling of I'm so separate. I'm so small. Like I'm putting myself I'm in a corner here. And for me, the way that it shows up, and it shows up, I would say probably 3 to 4 times a year. Like, and it's almost like there's this really strong desire to justify. No, this time I'm justified to blame this person or blame that for how I'm feeling. And for me, I try to catch myself as fast as I can, and it's definitely faster than it used to be. But my experience this past August, like it lasted like a whole month. Like, no, I am justified, and I'm the victim, and this is not okay. And man, it hurts. It hurts. And so for me, the tell is always I am blaming something or someone else for how I'm feeling.
Mm,
A story, a belief, a person, like something else is responsible for how I feel. And it just sneaks up on me. Like, I I think no, this time it's really their fault. um so yeah, I wanted to share that because it's a familiar experience of chaos always the chaos before the clarity comes. And then the clarity comes, you're like, oh, finally, like, oh, look at me go. Look at me kicking and screaming and, you know,
Yeah,
thinking I'm above it all.
that same mentor of Nothing Missing. I was sitting with him by the river recently, and he talked about how confusion is the path. That we go through these periods of confusion and clarity, and when we're confused, that's the work, is to continue through that. One of the practices that he introduced me to many years ago was watercourse walking, and it just captivated me. Like the first time I did it, it was the most profound, insightful experience that I had ever had, and felt like years of therapy in a couple of hours walking along this little stream through the forest. And it was a very contemplative practice of reflection. And I've gone back and done it, over 60 times on my own with different groups and different people. It's just a really profound practice. But in this particular journey, the experience is often, you start at the source of where this water course begins. The water will often disappear. You'll get into really swampy areas. And then the banks will form, and you'll be walking along this beautiful stream through this magical forest. And it's been a very tangible experience for me of those moments of confusion when I'm sitting in the swamp and feel all alone and stuck in the muck and not moving forward at the pace that I want. And sometimes those strolls along the beautiful clear stream feel much more preferable. But it's often been the insights that have arisen in the moments that I'm in the swamp that are more profound. And there's a trust there that even though I don't
Yeah.
see it and don't experience the water flowing in the same kind of way, it's still moving. It's still learning to kind of find my way through that swamp until that clarity emerges again. And so
Mm.
that's how nature practice has been very informative to um, my own path of growth and insight. And it's a
So it's
powerful
like,
mirror.
absolutely. So trusting that that life is still flowing with creativity and intention and meaning, even when it appears like it's not.
Mm, yeah, feels stagnant and stuck, and but also beautiful. Like, and again, the experience of being immersed in that, and you don't have to be in the middle of the woods to do this. Like, we all have this kind of experience of energy flowing within us. And we all, I think, have those experiences of flow and experiences of of things feeling a little bit more stagnant. Uh, However, for me, that the mirror of nature and immersing myself in that has been a powerful experience of learning to trust and find the beauty in the swamp.
Mm.
Um, and it's absolutely there. It's in fact, it's it's some of the more profound experiences. That have happened in my life have come from those swampy things that I felt like I didn't like at the time.
So now you are well, correct? With the cancer.
Yeah, as far as I know,
Okay.
prognosis is good. My energy is back. My activity is back to pretty normal levels, and I'm feeling really good. So,
So looking back, what was the big what was the wisdom from the swampy 6 to 10 months?
mm, it sounds really simple. And I had this experience within the first 2 or 3 weeks of being diagnosed last November, December. And it was that reconnection with it's going to be okay, that I've always been okay.
Mm.
And I've not always felt like I'm okay, I've often resisted and contracted and been anxious or um, and then kind of I guess the value of experience of going through some of those ups and downs or swamps and confusion and coming out the other side of them is recognizing that I've always been okay, that there's something um again, language is hard here, that
Mhm.
the garden aspect, the metaphor that you used earlier, that the rose can die, the garden is still okay, that our broader true nature, my consciousness, whatever we want to call it, that my body can go through an illness, um, I'm still okay and will be okay, regardless of what the outcome will be. And so at this point, cancer almost feels unreal that I went through that. Like at most a little blip in, or a small
Mhm.
swamp that I went through. It certainly didn't feel like that at the time. It felt like a
Mhm.
real slog. There was a moment when I'd seen the surgeon and he said, "Okay, you're good to go. I'll see you in 3 months. Go be active to tolerance." And I went to my cottage in Cape Breton that weekend and dove into the Bredor Lakes, and it just was the most amazing feeling to be able to um, just feel all of that shedding from my body and be back in that experience of being active and held and
Mm.
again a real joy to um, feel that energy again. And I guess if there's any wisdom in that, it's a deeper trust that at those times when I'm feeling that something is missing or not going the way that I wanted to, or that it's still okay, there's still an unfolding, there's still a flow that's happening that will continue.
Mm. It, thank you for sharing that. It made me think of that. I have that similar belief, you know, and for some reason, I think it's my mom that gave it to me. Like I've definitely written already about my relationship with my mom, and I've, a lot of people know about the healing that we've done, and but my mom always had this unshakable trust in life and in me. And even so much so that when I had the car accident and she was called in the middle of the night, she went back to sleep and then left the next day to come see me. And I remember thinking, like, how did you do that? Like, I needed you, like, at that moment. Like, you should have got on a plane and you should have, like, just. And she said, no, I knew you would be okay. And so that's not what you want to hear when you're so scared for your own life. Um, but looking back, like, she's always had that deep trust in life and in me that it was going to be okay regardless. So I thought that was cool. Thank you for bringing that up. And I yeah, I mean it's a ground. I think that a ground that says, like, even if this physical body dies and it's the end of this adventure for now, that's also okay. And to get to a place where you can really trust that's freedom. To circle back
Yes.
to how we started.
Yeah. And again, for me, just to be really honest, the experience of that is very much a hide and seek kind of experience, and that sometimes absolutely that trust is there and I hold that view and nothing is missing and I'm very grounded in that experience. And then sometimes I'm grasping tightly and holding on for dear life because it feels something is missing and I need it to be a certain way. That
Mm.
still is part of my experience, and I don't know that it ever will not be. Uh, and to me, the practice within that is learning to utilize those let's call them negative feelings as pointers back to, oh, I'm believing something that's not really true here.
Mm.
There's a bigger picture that I've lost sight of. There's a deeper experience that I can surrender into and trust.
Yeah. It's an invitation, a new opening to more freedom.
Hmm.
So, okay, so I'd love to kind of conclude our conversation today by asking you a question or two questions that kind of lead in the same place. So, the question that you asked me before, like, what are you afraid of most these days? But I feel like it's similar to what's the edge of your familiar right now?
Mm.
You might actually be in a place where you've landed for a little while.
Uh, I think what's most active for me right now, there's also been sort of a refocusing or returning into work, and having gone through this experience and doing the work that I do, what feels most meaningful to me now, and how do I, and that's always been part of my path, part of what I said earlier that I help others with is how do you create the life that you love? How do you have the impact that you want to have in the world? And so there's this tension that I experience between sort of just acceptance of how things are and this desire to create something different or some sort of change or experience that is beyond how things are. And that's a very active internal conversation for me right now about my work and how I want to manifest this next aspect of my work in the world and the impact that I want to have. And that feels very much that it's emergent in the space of health and food and wellness and
Mm-hmm.
deepening those experiences and commitments that I've had for a long time, um, and probably continuing to share more explicitly the more spiritual aspect of that in my work. Um,
Mm. Mm.
I kind of talked about heart work as something that has informed my practice and is always present in my work. It's not always sort of explicit, and nor should it always be, but I think there is a call on my heart to bring more of that into the work that I'm doing with those that want that support.
Mm.
I'm not sure what that looks like right now, and it does. There is an edge of the familiar and a hint of fear within that.
Mm.
I think I'd describe fear as sort of the feeling and intuition as a deeper knowing. And I think that ability to distinguish between what's fear and what's intuition and where do I want to lean in and where do I want to, um, you know, maybe avoid.
Mm.
And that's a discernment that is ongoing in me right now, and specifically in the context of my work.
I love that so much. That makes me very excited because I know you're how powerful you are when you're coaching people. And so this to me just feels like even just more gifts of Nick in the world, just more of that beautiful heart and wisdom that you always show up in every moment with. That's the gift that you are. It's like when, if you want someone to be present to the potential and the magic that's is there in the moment, that's what you do. Like that's what you bring. And I know that's something that a lot of us crave. Like, like we're not interested in more knowledge. We're not interested in more information. We just want something that is really real and that we can um, really feel in the authenticity of the moment in conversation with others. And so that's I'm really grateful that you're going to keep expanding that.
Thank you.
that
And you
piece.
you mentioned earlier that feeling of permission or that sense when we're together, and that's mutual. You invite that in me as well. You bring me into a deeper space of authenticity and willingness to share and your openness to that. So that's always made it easy. It's not
Mm.
always doesn't always feel like it's a welcome present. Um, and I agree. I think it's really important for us to find spaces and places and people where we are supported to express ourselves more fully. And only when we do that do we find our true path.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's a huge need um, for role models um, for men in this sphere, because there's, as you know, in the work that I do, like I probably attract 90% women, and and I'm always looking for that, like, there's men are just looking for a role model. They're looking for an example of a man who didn't lose it all by being vulnerable. And they actually gain everything, and they're showing how they gain, and they grew and they expanded and they became more free and they became more themselves and they felt more passionate and connected. But the fear is often that they're going to lose so much. And so I really do appreciate that you're you're a role model like that for other men.
Mm, thank you. I remember talking to you once about, after having read your book and saying, your work has to reach more men. And you're like, well, maybe, but maybe that's not mine to do.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, I'm also reminded of uh, being on retreat at Windhorse Farm and sort of a model of learning how to hold ourselves, how to be held by others, and how to hold others. And everyone that is there on that retreat is somebody that has a natural tendency to want to hold space for other people and support others in some way. They've also generally recognized that, oh, I need to also learn to hold myself. And my observation, maybe just my own experience, but my observation of a commonality among the group with both men and women was that there was a big desire to skip over that step two of being held, being vulnerable, recognizing that we all need support. And it's only when we have that support that we can actually most effectively be present to and hold that space for other people.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, a real deepening into that. And that does require a lot of trust and openness. And, again, that story I told of just, oh, I'm here, I might as well just dive in and go for it. It's not that I did it without any resistance and completely willingly. It was a really challenging process to let some of that go and be open to it, and absolutely worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks to you and many other people along the path that have been wonderful at holding me and supporting me.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with me today, Nick. I really enjoyed sharing that space with you. Thank you for saying yes to the invitation.
Yeah, I had to trust that one too. So, yeah,
Yeah,
always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
thank you.
Words on the street, they say that you don't care about me anymore. But you know it's in the way they walk, in the way they talk. I don't believe a thing, I don't believe a thing they say. You know I love you anyway, anytime, any place. You mean the world to me, You mean everything to me, and that's why I say, this is your life.